Yes, greetings. This is just a continuation of the messages that we had before. So, a warm welcome to you all. I'm hoping that you've been sticking to that which we discussed concerning the introduction of the doctrine of the resurrection of the dead, also the introduction to the doctrines, uh, just the acquaintances that we gave concerning the knowledge about what's the doctrine, then also uh, the framework that we laid on the doctrine of the resurrection of the dead. So this message actually seeks to take from the doctrine of the resurrection of the dead. We're going to take it from there to explore more concerning the doctrine itself. But right now, I'm still dealing with the framework issues, that which helps you understand the writings of the scripture, the writings of the things of God. What is it that the Bible is saying, right? If you acquaint yourself with these general messages, you're going to be able then to relate with that which is written easily, right? So today, I'm first maybe going to just discuss that which we discussed before concerning the introduction of the doctrine of the resurrection of the dead. What is it mean? What is it that the dead will resurrect? We established that it can be summarized by just merely saying that God was going to create the spiritual world later, but first he had to create a natural world. The first world, or the natural world, it only served to give light, or it only served to be able to create that which is spiritual, right? So that which is spiritual, which was going to be created later on, would depend on that which is natural. The natural is serving purpose to create that which is uh, spiritual later on. So that's basically the summary of the doctrine of the resurrection of the dead. When then the dead are resurrecting, we are going to have a new creature. We are going to have a new people. We are going to have a spiritual being that is going to be created there out of that which is natural, right? So that's how it is. The corruptible must put on that which is incorruptible, and then later on, all shall be unto God, right? All shall be spiritual, all shall be able to relate to God. Then today we want to seek to understand the worlds, right? What is it that brought the worlds into existence? We know it's the creation of God. And in the creation of God, the creation itself was following a pattern in the doctrine of the resurrection of the dead. So, but the mere fact that God had to create that which is natural first, then that which is spiritual later on, it gave room to that which is now going to be discussed as the worlds, right? What worlds would then ensue from that? Because remember, we established also that that which are living, we're going to be demarcated, we're going to receive many diversifications among themselves, right? First, in the physical, some are going to be whites, some Chinese, some black, some Indian, and so on. That alone, this is happening in the physical, but that also is going to give room to a lot of realities. And these realities, which are going to function on they which are living, will give also a rise to a different form of worlds that we will discuss later on today. What are the worlds as well, which are there first in the world of the living? There are worlds also which will now be embedded inside. And the purpose of it all is to give us guidance towards the resurrection of the dead, is to give us guidance towards that which God established for to be done at a later end, right? Because the later end was to create that which is spiritual. The later end was going to bring a world which is going to remain forever before God. But the world of the living, which God first created, was going to be passing away. And the passing of that world means also it will pass away with all the other worlds which are embedded inside it. But we want for now to just understand those worlds. First, the world of the living as a whole. Secondly, the worlds which are embedded inside, so that we can know then how to read the scriptures, how to understand the references which are given to those worlds, and also to know the purpose of those worlds in light of the doctrine, right? But first of all, as we have established in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 15 the other time, we understood that that was not first which is spiritual, but that which is natural. Therefore, that which was created to start with is natural, right? And being natural as it is, we want to broaden also our understanding of that which is natural. Because in the eyes of God, that which is natural is that which is never going to remain, it's passing away, it's only serving the purpose to establish that which is spiritual, or it's only serving to create that which will remain before God. All right, so besides broadening our definition of that which is natural, right? Because we need to redefine everything, because that which is natural here in the eyes of God meant that which was passing by, that which was transient, that which was not going to remain, that which is vain, right? Eventually, everything that would pass away is vain, right? It was something that would be done away with eventually. So we'll first read the creation of the first world. I'm just going to read a few scriptures from the book of Genesis, from verse 1 up to verse 8, just to have us maybe, to allow us to discuss the world that God created. Because this world which God created, remember, it was only going to be created for that man which is natural to start with, right? The natural man and his world. The natural man and his earthly world, a world which would pass away. The book of Genesis chapter 1 from verse 1, in the beginning God created the heaven and earth, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw the light that it was good, and divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. Right? So this chapter goes on until we create the stars, the sun, until we have the aquatic life, until also we're going to have other terrestrial animals that is going to be created, and also eventually the creation of man himself. So man being the subject there, his realities are the creation in which he would function. And him being natural, the creation also, or the realities were going to be natural, right? They are all natural. But first, let me just establish the fact that maybe some do not know that God was to create another world which was going to last forever, not this. This world which he had started to create, it was going to pass away. So is mentioned in the book of 1 Corinthians, which I referred to. So I'm not going to read the book of 1 Corinthians, but I'll read other scriptures which then show us that God was going to create other people first. He was also going to create another world which was going to remain before him, right? So first, let me read the book of Psalm 102, verse 18. This shall be written for the generation to come, and the people which shall be created shall praise the Lord. So there was a people which shall be created of God, according to the word of the prophet there in book of Psalm, Psalm 102, verse 18. Also Isaiah chapter 65, verse 17. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered, nor come into mind. So the new world also it would include a new man, a new people, then also a new heaven and a new earth. The other scripture is Isaiah chapter 66, verse 22. For as the new heavens and the new earth which I will make shall remain before me, said the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain, right? So this scripture seeks to add also to the fact that God was to create a new world, a new heaven and a new earth, and this world was going to remain before God, or this world, in other terms, it's a world which is ever going to be before God. It's a spiritual world, right? So let's now look into the creation itself, how it happened in the book of Genesis chapter 1, to show the realities of that world which was created, right? This is a natural world into which a natural man was going to function. It is a world which is earthy, according to the man also who was going to function in that world. The realities of that world, they are earthy, they are passing by. All these things which were created and the realities were going to govern a natural man, right? But to add to that now, something much more, I think, more important is the understanding of the word natural in the eyes of God. All the things that we're going to be passing by are defined here as natural, right? So it means that it includes the fowls and all the beasts which were created. That is, all the spiritual bodies which were created. Spiritual, including in that case the devil himself, because the devil is part of the beasts which were created of God in the book of Genesis chapter 1. So if you go to the book of Genesis chapter 3 verse 1, the beast was also part of the devil was also part of the beast which God had created. So all those animals being natural in this case, meaning to say they were not going to remain forever. They were going to pass away. So they are also bound to that natural world. They are also bound to the world of the man who was going to be created first, to the world of Adam, right? So those animals are included in that world, right? So what is it that God was trying to say? It is something that should be taking shape as we go, because the devil also was created of this earthly world, right? The devil also was made of natural substance. We are going to see that these spiritual bodies, like the spiritual beings which were created also of the book of Genesis chapter 1, I'm saying spiritual bodies here because yes, they are spiritual, but they were not going to remain forever, right? Therefore, that makes them natural according to the first definition. That makes them passing by, right? Things that would come and pass by. So I'm just going to add the book of Ezekiel to show you that being spiritual, these animals were bound to the first world because they were created out of the earth, right? So Ezekiel chapter 28 actually describes the king of Tyre as well. But however, this description meant to say a spiritual body, right? Of a spiritual animal, of a spiritual existence. This spiritual existence was made of precious stones. It was made of onyx, topaz, and so. If you read from the book of Ezekiel chapter 28, you are going to see that it was a cherub. So being a cherub, but still being bound to the earthy form, right? Being made out of the earth. So it was also bound to be passing away. It was also bound to be something that would come and go. Also, the book of Psalm 82, you are going to hear the conversation that is recorded there, wherein gods were actually promised. If you read from verse 6, it says, I have said you are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High, but you shall die like men and fall like one of the princes. Right? So these being in the form of gods, right? But they would die like men, right? So they would pass away. They would not exist forever, according to the statements here, enlightened of God. Their dominion or their continuance was not going to be forever. It's a world which was passing away with its realities. So this is the first world in definition, the world of men, or the world of the living, that is, and its realities, all including their gods, right? Yeah. So by this we can actually say all the knowledge also which was bound to this first man, including all the gods which would govern him, all the gods which would help him, all the gods which would participate in this world, they were all going to be passing away, right? Gods would die, that's according to the scriptures. So the same again with the gods which were bound to men, gods would also die. So we are going to see that the gods which were worshipped of men, those gods also, they were not going to remain forever. So it's part of that world, which is the living, the world of the living, right? So here we defined it broadly, but we're going to look into other worlds which existed inside that world of the living. Remember the other time we mentioned and said the world of the living itself is going to be found demarcated or diversified inside itself to portray certain things which are spiritual, which would not be known by this man which is natural. Remember, the man who was created natural, he cannot relate to the things of the spirit. However, due to the fact that men should understand the things of the spirit were embedded in that which is natural, right? Taking the form of the natural, but preaching of things which are spiritual. So inside that world, you are going to find that besides what we discussed the other time, say the diversifications due to race or due to places of function, men are going to be found at different places, or men are going to be found being presented in different races and tribes. That's another factor that we discussed the other day. But today we also want to add the fact that men also would have a lot more other realities, worlds around himself, right? Maybe for now, I mean, just mention them to say men can understand different worlds. For instance, we can hear men being told of the world of the living, then the world of the dead, right? We hear places like Hades, for instance. All that creates another reality which surrounds man, right? Creates another reality of worlds which man is also able to know about, able to relate with. It's an existential reality to the man who is earthy. So these worlds also are passing away, just as man himself of the first world, they will pass away, just like the gods also, which are found maybe monitoring or staying in those places or defined according to those places, they are also going to be passing away according to the scriptures. We read saying gods would also pass away, right? This is just a description of the world which was first created, that which is natural, that which served the purpose of preaching of that which is spiritual. That is passing away. So right now I'm going to just make you look into first the world of the living, because the world of the living is the world that I wanted us to discuss when we looked into the ministration of the apostles, or the ministrations that was done of Jesus when he came, right? Because it was a ministration meant to address the living, that is the living component of all the living. Remember, all the living are demarcated into the dead and the living, right? But the living would be addressed first in the ministrations of the apostles. They will be addressed first also in the ministrations of Jesus. Though Jesus also taught concerning the ministration which would come from the resurrection of the dead, or which would come from the dead side, he taught mainly among the living, right? As he said when he was referring to the men who would want to come to Jesus, whom he said, no, come thou, let the dead bury their dead, right? So That actually is a statement also which showed that Jesus was referring to his ministration among the living, and the dead would go and bury their dead, right? I will explain these things further, but I think this work that I'm doing is shedding light bit by bit into your understanding of the world of the living, which was divided into the world of the living and the dead, so that these who are living can understand better about their dead. Remember, they are natural men, so things were to be presented naturally to them in that environment or in that world, right? So now I'm going to look into the ministration among the living, shedding light into other worlds that would then appear to the man who is living. So that's where we are going to look into now. Just understand that there is nothing complicated here. It's all to do with the discovering other worlds which God embedded in the world of the living, so that the living can understand better about the spiritual things. This world is just meant to preach to a natural man. Therefore, it presents things to the natural man in somewhat things which are maybe they might be spiritual, but still passing away. Therefore, everything in that world is just something natural. It's not really spiritual, right? Yes, so this is almost what we looked at the other time, but I've just maybe reproduced something similar so that we can then explain further the worlds that are going to be found in the world of the living, right? So the living, that is all of us who came from Adam, all of us who were born of the first Adam, right? The world to which a natural man functions. That world is the world of the living. But the same world, as I have been saying already, is demarcated into the living and the dead, so that we can have understanding, being natural ourselves, of our deaths, that is, of that which is not yet functional, that which is spiritual but not yet functional, right? So the enlightenment into that, we can only see it through the natural, right, which we can relate with. Because we are natural men, we are born of that which is natural. We are in the process of having that which is spiritual, that which has been quickened into that which is heavenly, right? So, as it is, if you look into this, you're going to see that the portions among the living, the ministration which would happen among the living, it would take a portion from the living who are among the living and the living which are among the dead, right? So that we did show the other time. I need now to explain further this portion, which the ministration which would happen among the living, before we can look into the ministration which happened among the dead, and also an exploration into the worlds which would then govern these, because these would actually function in different worlds altogether. I think you can see the worlds can be mentioned to mean also the realities around these people, right? So the living would have their own realities. The living who are among the dead have their own realities, are governed by the religion, governed by the information delivered to them, that is, of the angels which were in communication with them, right? So the angels which would communicate with the dead are different from the angels which would communicate with the living. Angels which would govern people and instruct them how to extract godliness here in Africa are different from the angels that would influence godliness inside Europe, right? So I have made that supplication before to say that if the people who are here in Africa wanted to invoke the gods, their procedures are different, and they would function also under different laws, right? Just like it happens also in the progression concerning the living, in the progression concerning the scriptures, you are also going to see that people at different levels would function differently from the people at another level. People who existed during the law of Moses have their own realities and had their own law. People who would function during the ministration of the apostles had their own law as well and their own realities, right? That's actually another example. And also, if you take they which would then exist under the Quran, they have their own law as well, according to the commandments of men given at that particular point in time. But all that just sort to say they existed in different worlds, right? And that would be broadened further, especially if you compare the dead and the living, because those they're actually going to give you a very much big gap. But I want to explore that in the scriptures now, to discuss first that which happened among the living, because the scriptures showed that which happened among the living, and the living among the dead. And also the scripture at some point would mention that which would happen among the dead, right? Yeah. So let's look into that. So I'm going now to look into the things that we discussed concerning the ministration among the living. That is the ministrations which happened of Jesus, and also that which happened among the apostles. All that ministration, it sought to extract a ministration to the living, right? So the other time we said it was a passing ministration, and also we then showed that Jesus would prophesy about another ministration which would come from the dead, right? That's what we looked into when we read the book of Luke chapter 14, where Jesus was comparing to say, there shall come a better ministration, right? They shall come, he who was coming with 20,000, with an army of 20,000 against he with 10,000. And that he with 10,000 was supposed to send embassies of peace. That is, the ministration which was done among the living, it was supposed to echo, it was supposed to make a promise of that which was coming. It was supposed also to send peace towards that which was coming, right? So we demonstrated that in a number of ways, that the ministration of the apostles would acknowledge that they knew nothing compared to that which they were supposed to know. They were ministration of men, therefore that ministration of men knew nothing than he ought to know. It was not a perfect ministration. It was going to be superseded by that which is perfect, which was to come, right? That portion we did. And also, maybe just to add concerning that which Jesus used, was Jesus used a number of examples to explain that ministration. He also said the building of the tower would actually be complete when that which was to come was to fulfill the mission of building the tower, right? And also they which were supposed to follow Jesus would have to would have to hate their father, their mother, their children, and so all that was simply meaning to say a change of understanding. The understanding which would come from the dead was superior. Therefore, they had to abandon all that they had gathered under the living, right? As said also Paul, to say that which is perfect was going to supersede all that was ministered before, right? That which is perfect was going to come with a better knowledge, with a better understanding. So whether they be tongues, whether they be prophecies, or whether it be knowledge, it was all going to pass away, right? That's the language that Jesus was also speaking in parables there, or in similitudes, or in diversifications, wherein he was teaching the same message as a promise of that which was to come, right? So these are the things that we discussed the other time. But maybe I will just need to add more clarity concerning the ministrations which happened among the living. Because as I said, it is a ministration which had two components, the living among the living and the living among the dead. And of these two, after being united into one, that is, after achieving the one, It sought also to then portray the kingdom, right? A heavenly message, which I said that was it, which was embedded in the ministration of the Apostle Paul, and the embedding of that ministration would then portray sort of a kingdom setup, right? It would talk of interpretation of tongues. It would talk of the gathering of the body of Christ together. It would talk of the gathering of men together, right? So that actually is a portrayal of that which was being spoken of God, but herein portrayed with the only two components, the living among the living and the living among the dead. So those two components made that ministration portray a kingdom setup. It spake from a heavenly level. It spake from a level which is almost heavenly, but not yet heavenly. A ministration which was, according to what we also concluded then, that it was a ministration which would happen only on the third day. It was before the resurrection, but taking a form of a resurrection. So that's why it would then portray the true resurrection, because the true resurrection is the one which will take us to the kingdom. The true resurrection is the one which will take us to that which is heavenly. That is the kingdom of God, which is the kingdom set in heaven, right? So that's how it is. But for now, I want us to read the book of 1 Samuel chapter 28 to then maybe validate that which I spoke before and show also to you why this ministration would take a component of the living and a component of the living among the dead. And this, out of this component, it was then going to portray a kingdom, right? I want also to explore the realities of the worlds, right? As I speak, I want us to explore the worlds which would govern the living, which would govern also the living among the dead as well, right? That was actually shown easily in the book of First Samuel. But remember, these worlds, as they would exist, they only sought to give men better understanding of his realities. Men was supposed to be taught of that which is spiritual, being far from this man which is natural. Things were portrayed in a natural way, right? Things were portrayed in worlds which would pass away. Things were portrayed, though seemingly spiritual, they were things that would pass away. As their gods would pass away, as we read, so was also the worlds which were presented to men, that is, to a living man. I encourage you to read the whole chapter, because here I want us to have an understanding. I don't want us to be reading these scriptures. I want you to read the scriptures and then seek to know what is it that God was saying. And that's the portion which I'm going to concentrate on. But maybe I'm just going to summarize what's there in the book of 1 Samuel. The book of 1 Samuel is written to show us what happened when the war had progressed, right? The war between Israel and the Philistines after Samuel the prophet had died, and also at the point of Saul himself finishing his ministration. That is, Saul had served Israel, and this was time for him to put an end to that service to Israel as the king, because God was no longer speaking to Saul. God stopped speaking to Saul or answering to Saul either by the prophets or by dreams or by to name. What is it that was happening? It is because God wanted to express the fact that the ministration which Saul had done, right, it was complete among Israel, and also the same Saul was going to do the same ministration among the dead who are living, right? That's where these terms come from. The dead who are living, or the living who are among the dead. These terms come because of this knowledge that I'm sharing with you, the knowledge about the resurrection of the dead. The components would be two, the living from among the living and the living among the dead, with the ministration of the living, right? So Saul and Samuel first would prophesy their part among the living, right? The living who are living. Then also they would prophesy their part as well among the dead who are living, right? So, or the living among the dead, right? But God presented this in this fashion. The woman with a familiar spirit is a woman who actually used the spirit of the dead, right? So, being there now, that woman would help Saul access that ministration which God wanted to speak of. God wanted to tell us beforehand that as that which was done among the living during their life, Saul and Samuel would preach of the living, right? Then there is another component, their neighbor, who was going to be presented among the dead. So that is the living among the dead, right? So, but it was presented in sort of the worlds, right? It was presented as the same Samuel or the same Saul who would live among Israel. He would die and go to the land of the dead. And there in the land of the dead, they would meet as well. The same Samuel and Saul and his sons, they would also go to the land of the dead, right? That had nothing to do with anything else. It all sought to give light into the ministration which would happen to remind men or to remind humanity that they are actually one. Where Saul and Samuel would speak from, there, yes, it's a reality which was among the living to say that there is a world of the dead. But all that sort only to preach to men that you have a component of you which is from the dead, right? Yeah. So let me just read, I think, the portions of the narrative. So Saul was worried because God would no longer speak to him. Therefore, he sought through his servant a woman who had a familiar spirit. And through that woman who had a familiar spirit, he would then be able to access Samuel who had died and hear from Samuel that which God had spake, right? So a woman with a familiar spirit would bring him knowledge about Samuel, and Samuel would speak through that woman. What is it that God was saying? God only spake to tell us of that component, right? That's what he meant. But he wanted us to have more light. As I told you before, I said that which happened among the Greeks, the Greek mythology and the Roman mythology, it was all to do with that component of the living among the dead, right? They had written books, poems, and many other writings, maybe poems or theatrical presentations of things. All those poems which were written, be it the Theogony or the Iliad or the Odyssey or many other writings that would be spoken among the Greek and the Roman communities, all that sought to just tell us of the component which had actually happened also inside Israel, right? But God presented it here. This is how we validate the doctrine. The doctrine is going to be established through that which is written and also shown to explain itself through various examples or various diversifications of the same message, right? So there is a world of the dead where the woman would speak to Saul through Samuel, right? So the woman would actually speak as though she is Samuel herself. But I just want us to hear the conversation between the woman and Saul up until the woman is able to present Samuel, and Samuel said what he said. From verse 8, Saul disguised himself and put on other raiment. And he went, and 2 men with him. And they came to the woman by night, and he said, I pray thee, divine unto me by the familiar spirit, and bring me him up, whom I shall name unto thee. And the woman said unto him, Behold, thou knowest what Saul hath done, how he hath cut off those that have familiar spirits and the wizards out of the land. Wherefore then layest thou a snare for my life, to cause me to die? And Saul sware to her by the Lord, saying, As the Lord liveth, there shall no punishment happen to thee for this thing. Then said the woman, Whom shall I bring up unto thee? And he said, Bring me up Samuel. And when the woman saw Samuel, she cried with a loud voice. And the woman spake to Saul, saying, Why hast thou deceived me? For thou art Saul. And the king said unto her, Be not afraid, for what sawest thou? And the woman said unto Saul, I saw gods ascending out of the earth. And he said unto her, What form is he of? And she said, An old man cometh up, and he is covered with a mantle. And Saul perceived that it was Saul, and he stooped with his face to the ground, and he bowed himself. And Samuel said to Saul, Why hast thou disquieted me to bring me up? And Saul answered, I am so distressed, for the Philistines make war against me, and God is departed from me, and answereth me no more, neither by prophets nor by dreams. Therefore I have called thee, that thou mayest make known unto me what I shall do. I will read up to this verse only. The other parts I will just have to tell you, or you read yourself as well. But I will just mention the details which then followed, in light with what we want us to understand for now, right? So, what really happened in this is that Saul, as a prophet, he understood that when God was going to make an end of speaking to him in that dispensation, God was actually sending a message to say he is now going to be speaking from the dead, right? That is, according to this, he was going to be speaking from the living among the dead, right? To the neighbor, right? And we are going to see that Saul went straight to that woman which had familiar spirits, and he also swore by the name of God that she was not going to die as long as the Lord liveth, right? So this other is a clue which tells you that Saul was referring to the living among the dead. Going to that woman, it showed understanding inside Saul. And that's why Saul would even swear by the name of God. He understood as a prophet that God was going to put an end to the ministration among the living at some point in time. And that same ministration would reflect itself from among the dead. He was acting according to the doctrine of the resurrection of the dead. That the same ministration which would happen among the living, it would happen also among the dead, right? So it would that which was shown among the living who are living would also be shown among the living who are dead, right? Then eventually as well, that ministration which would happen among the living would actually also be enlightened among the dead. So these are the progressions which are there in the doctrine of the resurrection of the dead. So at the first progression, Saul had ministered among the living, right? Then also he had also to minister among the dead, right? We are living, right? But that would only be necessitated by an understanding of the worlds. The world here which has been presented is the world of the dead, right? So men would be made to interact with the world of the dead, because the world of the dead, though not going to be existing forever itself, it's only a world which is going to be showing men of the progression or of the voice of God, right? So those with familiar spirit would work with gods who would also come from the dead side, right? So those gods would tell them messages about they which were living, which are now dead. But all this in itself, not an existential reality. It's only a reality because it's a reality which is preaching to men of the doctrine of the resurrection of the dead, right? So there is nothing really to be afraid of the world of the dead, because in itself, the world of the dead is only an accessory, it's only a message to us who are living, so that we may know what is it that God is saying. So if you understand the resurrection of the dead, we will know why some men were made to be speaking with the dead, right? In reality, you are going to see that if a ministration happened among the living, in its end, it will die, right? As we saw in the previous messages, that the ministration of men were meant to rise and fall, right? So Paul would minister, but his ministration, he would actually at the end of it, he would die himself, right? That ministration would die, and it would be reflected from the dead side, this side, as a better ministration, interpreting that which he had done during his days, right? The same again, that's why you hear in the book of Acts chapter 2, you hear Peter referring to David that he died, right? The same with Moses, that he died, right? So all those ministrations would come and go. All those ministrations would die at some point in time. And they will be reflected in another form, right? They will be reflected in the ministration first, the living who are dead, right? Or the dead who are living, right? All that only seeking to explain the things of God. So man who was created now, we can see that he was also exposed to the world of the dead. That's why you hear people knowing about the world of the dead. That's why you hear gods monitoring and telling people about the world of the dead, right? It's only there to explain a reality which is spiritual, now also existing in the physical as an exploration. So you hear about Hades, you hear about so many spiritual places. All those places, to tell you the truth, they are only seeking to tell us more about the doctrine, right? So I'm now going to explain what happened here. Remember, what is it then that tells me that this is a world of the living, right, among the dead, which Saul would come from, right? Both Saul and Samuel, and also even his sons, the sons of Saul, and everyone else who had functioned in the world of the living, would be portrayed also in the world of the dead, right? Where they would be portrayed as gods, right? Remember when the woman was being asked, if you pick those scriptures, I'm not going to return back to the scriptures, but I'm going to explain them now, and you can read and understand what I'm saying. The woman was asked of Saul to say, what is it that are you seeing, right? And the woman said, no, I can see gods ascending out of the earth, right? So there's a world which was under the earth, and in that world, gods were ascending. But the ascension of the gods was interpreted of Saul himself. Saul said, what is it that you see? What is his form, right? So the ascension of many gods can be interpreted as a form or his form, right? And in that form, he was an old man covered in a mantle. And Saul understood that it meant Samuel, right? So the same Samuel was portrayed now by gods, right? As I told you, to say that which happened among the gods, teaching Greek mythology, Roman mythology, it's a reflection of that which is among the living, but happening among the living who are dead, right? It's the same extraction. That's how it's extracted. That's how it's understood. So that same Samuel was portrayed among the dead. How? Through gods. So the understanding of God would portray, God would shape, God would depict that which is known among the living. So this goes by the understanding to say that which is written or understood among the Greek mythology is the same thing which is understood among the living here in the scriptures, right? So you will find that the same Samuel is being portrayed by form of gods there, right? And the same message which he said while he was living is the same message that he also says among the dead. He's saying, so your reign is not going to last, you're actually going to die, and after that you are dead, you are going to come to the dead, right? Which means your ministration is going to continue among the dead. That is, you're also going to be depicted as I have been depicted myself among the dead, right? And also the fact that the whole host of Israel is going to be delivered to the Philistines. This is also a prophecy concerning the end of a ministration which happened among the living. Once it's ended, that ministration is prone to abuse, right? It's only going to be useful, interpreted by that which is higher, that which is coming after itself, right? The same with the ministration of Moses, it would only be useful and more profitable being interpreted of Jesus or of the apostles in the later teachings. So we are going to see that that's why then the Pharisees would also misuse the scriptures. Pharisees would misuse the ministrations done before. That is the ministration of the prophets, the ministration of Moses, but that same ministration will be used well of the apostles and of Jesus in his teachings, right? But that's why we say the previous ministrations would be used either for the good or for the bad, as also said the prophet in the book of Ecclesiastes to say, he was lamenting in Ecclesiastes chapter 2 to say, who will tell men that cometh after the king, whether he will be a wise man or whether he will be a fool, right? So that which a man had labored in, either he had labored in equity, whether he had labored in justice, whether he had labored in wisdom, it will still fall into the hands of a wrong man. It will still fall into the hands of a man who cometh after him, right? So the same also is being spoken here of Saul himself. Saul was going to be delivered to the hands of the Philistines. The same with the host of Israel and also his son, right? But what I want us to know here is we are only being told of a ministration which will happen among the dead, right? And among the dead, things are portrayed differently. They are portrayed first using gods, and those gods, they mold the same thing that is being spoken of among the living. The same is molded among the dead, right? So that extraction is very important because it's going to give us guidance into understanding the forms of mythologies or the forms of worship which were done, say, in the Greek mythology itself and the Roman mythology and other mythologies that would come. That's why we say all these are governed by the doctrine, right? So if we only understand the doctrine of Jesus Christ, we're going to know what was happening inside the Greek mythology. As I made before as a statement to say, that which is written in the Iliad, that which is written in the Theogony, that which is written in the Odyssey, that which is written in the Greek poems and in the Roman poems, mostly of that time, the classical times, all of it were prophecies. All of it were the things of God. But we don't need to learn about them. We need to know about it as a way of appreciating the work of God among all men and knowing the purpose of God among all men, right? Some might want to know, some might want to read the books, some might want to explore further. That is, after we are learned in the doctrine. People may want to explore further into those things. It doesn't really matter. it won't be a wild move. No one will be lost by doing that. They can do it if they have the energies. They can do it if they are enthusiastic about it. But we need to know that through the doctrine, to say, by the doctrine of the resurrection of the dead, it's true to say whatever that was spoken in those areas, whatever that was spoken among the living, whether the living among the living or the living among the dead, it was one message. What is the difference? It takes this form, that God would portray that which was among the living. The same Samuel would be portrayed as God's, right? Yeah. So that's how it goes. That's the pattern that creates the universality of the doctrine. It's some of the things that we need to know of, and some of the things that will help us understand further. Why is it then that it was portrayed as a ministration coming from the dead? That is, after the ending of the prophecy of Saul and Samuel, after the ending of their message among the living, that which came after, it came from the dead. It's equally the same, because God sought to bring the ministration which was coming hereafter as a brighter ministration. That ministration was coming from the dead, right? The same again with David's reign itself. That's why David is portrayed as one who rose from the dead. It was as though David was coming from the dead. It was as though David had rose from the dead. That's why he was also portrayed as a neighbor to Samuel, right? That's the reason why he won the kingdom. That's why he was given the kingdom, because God was now speaking from the other side, as also happened through the ministration of Apostle Paul. If you compare the ministration of Apostle Paul and of the apostles which were at Jerusalem, the ministration of Apostle Paul was more brighter, was actually preaching of the things which are more superior to the things that were known among Israel itself. It's because of that. That which would come from a message which is coming after is better and brighter. That which would come from the dead was better. In this case, the message which Apostle Paul sought for to preach, it came from the living who were among the dead, right? From the Gentiles. And that was better that was a better ministration in terms of its light, in terms of its knowledge, in terms of all other facets that we may try to compare with the ministration which happened with the apostles which were at Jerusalem, right? There was nothing off about it. It's the same again being portrayed by the rule of Saul and the rule of David. The rule of David already had the orientation of it coming from the dead side, because of these things that are being prophesied here in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 28, right? So God will no longer speak to Saul. The dispensation had ended. Saul understood that it meant that things were now going to the dead side. Therefore, he sought the woman who had a familiar spirit, right? That which they were preaching against, that which they were speaking against inside the law, it was now that which they were supposed to relate with. The same again with Apostle Paul. You see, the Gentiles were excluded from the ministrations which were done before. But he understood when his ministration was lit, he understood that it meant to say he had to include the Gentiles. He had to include the portion of the living who were among the dead. He had to include another. He had to include the neighbor, right? Right. So the neighbor, that's why you hear the same sentiments being shared of Jesus in his teachings in the book of Matthew chapter 22, verse 37, 38, that the commandment which say that thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, it was fulfilling the law. It's because of that. He was addressing the neighbor. He was addressing the other living, which is among the dead, right? So these things are, I'm sure you can see that they are still trying to mold a structure. So I can still say we're still on the introductory part. just trying to emphasize to men to know how these doctrines would define things, how these doctrines would define everything to do with humanity, the progression, the purpose, the alignment, and the distribution of nations. What is it that they would believe in? Who would guide them? Why were those gods coming to Rome or coming to Greek to teach them of all the sophistications of the Greek of the gods, how the gods came, how the gods would actually govern them? Why were they being taught all that sophistication? It's because it was merely the same message being reflected on the other side. It's still the message of God, but shown and demonstrated through gods. So maybe just to conclude this part before we can move on to the other parts, just understand that so understood that the fact that God would not speak to him, it meant to say that his dispensation had ended. The portion of that dispensation which would happen among the living, done of Saul, done also of Samuel, had ended. So he had to seek that which was from the familiar spirit. He had to go to the other side, right? And the Gentiles there, they were just representing the living among the dead, right? So he went to that woman, and the woman would tell him of the things that were spoken inside his ministration. It's just the same message being echoed from the other side. It's just the same message being replicated or maybe much more clarified with better understanding, right? Because the Gentiles would be given better understanding. God did so according to his will, that the progression of this ministration would produce a better ministration after it, right? So it's the same. You're actually going to see that so understood as well the fact that by going to the this woman, it had the blessing of God, and was going to receive the message of God. He never doubted the message. He never doubted the procedure of speaking to the dead, right? He never doubted the message which came as well. He never doubted that Samuel would actually speak from that end as well. He had confidence that truly the same Samuel would speak, and he would speak with an uncompromised message. It was because of the understanding that God wanted to give us in light of the resurrection of the dead, right? And you are also going to see that Samuel himself, he was very much disquieted by the coming of Saul to him. That spake the sufferings that would happen in the ministration among the Gentiles. You hear Paul himself saying, I die daily, right? By that ministration. Is showing us that ministration among the dead, right? That's exactly what he meant in all those messages. These things, you understand them as we go. This is said in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, when he was protesting concerning the resurrection of the dead, saying, I die daily by this ministration that I'm doing among the dead, right? So those are the things that you will begin to understand as we go. But I'm just laying the framework, I'm just laying the pegs, so that at least at the end of the day, people will understand these ministrations, and after that they understand these ministrations and how they will progress through time, how they were prophesied here in the book of 1 Samuel and in many other books, and how they will also unfold in reality in the ministrations of Apostle Paul and the ministration of the apostles. These create worlds, right? So the first world of the living among the living would end. Then cometh the world of the dead, right? And that's the progression of the worlds that I want us to know and I want us to hear. You are also going to see that these gods were worshipped inside Greece. They were also worshipped in Rome. They were also worshipped all over the known world, right? The known world itself, whether it be Babylon, these areas were all influenced by gods, right? But however, the message is, in those activities which were done to gods, there was embedded the message of the Bible, the message which was in the Tanakh, the message which was in the prophets, the message which was also echoed even in the teachings of Jesus. The same message is contained also in that writing, in those writings which were influenced by the gods, right? So I just maybe think of I think of adding this because I assume maybe everyone understood the Greek mythology itself or the Roman mythology. These people, remember, they were just serving gods. So there were many gods there, right? And in understanding these gods, you will hear of the theogony, which is maybe the writings which will tell them about every god. Zeus, how did he came to be? Kronos, how did he came to be? Rhea, Gaia, and many other gods which are there in the Roman mythology. There are many of them. But every of these gods would be worshipped differently. They would be appeased differently. But even in all that activity, in all that understanding of the gods and of the books which were written to add to the understanding of the mythology around these gods, all that understanding, it was all portraying the things of God. But however, in a different form, right? There were vain things, yes, vain things done and given to men so that men can understand the things of God eventually. When then the truth was going to come, when then the doctrine was going to come, men would understand the things of God better, and that understanding would be enlightening to the others as well, including they which had received the first living scriptures, right? Including Israel itself. Israel would actually rely on the Gentiles for better understanding of godliness. It's because godliness had already been portrayed better among the Gentiles, right? Through all those vain activities. This is the same message which was being echoed by Paul when he went to Athens in the book of Acts chapter 17. He actually said that this God whom we worship ignorantly, the same is he whom I am going to declare unto you. The same is that which I am going to declare unto you. So it meant to say, these people were already doing the things of God, however, they were just doing it ignorantly. This is the same understanding that governs the doctrine of the resurrection of the dead. Even later on, we are actually going to see that a better and a more perfect ministration would come from the dead side. God did compacted it that way so that by and all service, the body of Jesus can supply itself through various arms, through various worlds, through various places of ministration. And those ministrations which would come from the areas which might seem despised, they would be more perfect. They would have more understanding of the things of God. That's how it went. So God did not really neglect the Gentiles in allowing them to be under gods, right? To be serving gods who would die. Because remember, all these gods would die actually, whether it be whoever were ministering among the Gentiles. These gods were, yes, purposely spiritual, but they will all die away. Be it Zeus, be it Kronos, be it Rhea, be it the Titans, be it Minerva or whosoever. All these gods would die. Remember, they were all of the first world, which was natural. They were all of the reality of a natural man. And that reality of a natural man would die out, right? That's how it goes. But whatever law that they observed and gave to men, it was the law of the immortal gods. And they referred to say the immortal gods because they understood themselves to be passing away. And they were representing that law of God which would remain. So they were actually doctrinal in their practice, in their activities, to say they were representing that which would come, which is the resurrection of the dead, or they were also representing faith toward God, because that which would come from God would remain forever. I'm building these blocks because I want you to appreciate how God first configured the world and then also showed it through the writings in the scriptures, how those writings would help us understand the world so that we won't have much friction later on when we'll be teaching the things of God. People will understand where I'll be standing, they will understand where I'll be collecting evidences to support the doctrine, right? So these are the worlds, and I'm going to be moving forward in showing more concerning the worlds. Remember also, you are going to see that even among these gods, which would minister, say, in the Greek mythology or the Roman mythology, that's where we have understanding of certain worlds, say Hades itself. That's where we have the understanding of the world of the dead, right? Tartarus and many other places. The understanding of all those places, the sea itself, it all came through the much of it through the knowledge of the Greek mythology and the Roman mythology. But remember also that even though this message is there portrayed in those mythology religions, it was also stated in the scriptures. However, sometimes in ways that are difficult to understand. So that's how God did place it. That's how God did configure it. That the same Saul, or the same Samuel in this case of the conversation of the woman and Saul, the same Samuel would be portrayed as gods among the dead, right? So it would need someone who have better understanding, as said Saul, to say, what is the form of he, right? Being many gods, he was representing a he was representing Samuel himself. So you would need to scrutinize, you would need understanding to interpret. That's why Saul was able to interpret, because Saul had the scriptures. The woman would not understand because he had no scriptures. Saul himself would understand better what was it all that was coming from the dead, what was it all that was rising from the earth. So these worlds, I'm sure you can now see that there are worlds which are only there to help us understand. There is no amount of gods, there is no amount of spirits, or there is no amount of angels which can try then to use wrong influence, maybe causing fears inside you concerning these worlds. Tartarus, Hades, the world of the dead, and other places. All these things were just given to us of God to learn from them and not to be intimidated from them. These spirits, maybe they will just be using your misunderstanding and your ignorance also to prey upon you, to cause fear in you, so that they can continue to keep you in bondage. But as long as you have the doctrine, as long as you have understanding, you will know the purpose of every such place, every such world, and every such God which existed then, right? But all these gods would die away when that which is perfect